When people think about the autism spectrum, they typically don't understand it fully. Misconceptions and baseless claims, such as the false link between vaccinations and autism, are rampant in society. And with the current administration bringing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., our Secretary of Health, is having the CDC investigate the link between vaccinations and autism, which has been claimed to be false by multiple different studies and doctorates for over a decade.
I think that if the administration puts in research that really isn't researched, I think that would be bad as well. Um, and also, I think what will happen is that there'll be a lot of people trying to sell something that doesn't work because the Trump administration may devalue things that do work. So you might see a lot of new things coming out. When I first started this career, there was a thing called hug therapy that a kid with autism would just have someone come over and hug them, which was really, really bad because nobody should be hugged by a stranger. So things like that start to happen again. I think that could be very dangerous.
Hello, my name is Temujin Abeda. I am from Santo Domingo Pueblo and the Navajo Nations, which are two native tribes that are in the southwest region of the United States. The reason why I am making this film is to bring awareness and educate the public about what autism is and isn't. But a bit more about myself is that I am an autistic individual, I'm a visual thinker, and I'm an award-winning lapidary artist at the Santa Fe Indian Market for 4 years in a row. And last year in 2024, I have won first place and best of division. Now, so we can have a better understanding of what autism is, we need to understand the history of autism. The first major contribution to understanding what autism is came from Dr. Leo Kanner. In 1943, as a child psychiatrist at the Johns Hopkins University, he published a paper called Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, in which he introduced the term autism and outlined what he saw as the defining features of the condition. Unfortunately, Kanner's early view was deeply flawed, as he believed autism was caused by emotionally distant parents and was a form of schizophrenia. These ideas being contributed to the stigma surrounding autism is what led to 2 generations of children being sent to mental institutions. Meanwhile, across the world, in Austria, Dr. Hans Asperger was working on his own studies. His studies concluded that autism was not a result of cold and affectionate parents, but a diverse continuum. He often called his patients little professors in his notes. However, Hans Asperger's work was not used by the English-speaking world for several decades. Asperger's work was tragically overshadowed by the horrific events of World War II. Under the Nazi regime, he sent over 789 children to euthanasia camps where they were killed. In a few decades later, from the 60s to the 70s, when people were still using Kanner's theories in the Western world, Dr. Lorna Wings, an English psychiatrist, started seeing a pattern in several children.
Everybody with autism had low IQs in those days. That was before we knew about the Asperger work. And we did a study in Camberwell looking at everybody in that range of IQ. I had John had read Asperger's paper to me, and we had seen some individuals. We were asked to see individuals at the Maudsley Hospital who were inpatients there, and sometimes we were asked to see them, and some of them fitted Asperger's. There we were. It was much more common to have autism and a higher IQ, an IQ over 70, right up to genius level, than to have an IQ under 70, 3 or 4 times as common. And that was really the beginning of all this.
Lorna Wing's study was a major breakthrough in our understanding of autism. Eventually, she founded the National Autistic Society, a charity that supports autistic people and their families. At around the same time, a soon-to-be influential voice in the autistic community emerged, Dr. Temple Grandin. As an animal scientist, she used her visual thinking to revolutionize the cattle industry.
Well, a lot of people thought it was weird, but when they saw my work, I got respect for my work. One of the first jobs I got was being livestock editor for our state farm magazine. This is back when I was in my 20s. And the editor was at a cattle event, and I walked up and I got his card and started writing for them. Very important. And I got a reputation for writing good articles. When I covered the cattle feeders meeting, I summarized the talks accurately. And I got respected for being accurate reporting of something like the cattle feeders meeting and doing good summaries of the talks.
In 1981, at the National Autism Convention, Temple Grandin became a prominent voice in the autism community. She helped answer a lot of parents' questions, especially when it came to their child's behavior. And in 1986, she released her book called Emergence, Label Autistic, which talked about her early life as an autistic child of the 50s. And a decade later, she released Thinking in Pictures, which described how her way of thinking works and how it helped her with her career as an animal scientist. Temple Grandin still is a very prominent figure in the autistic community today.
Who do you think made the first stone spear? You know, it wasn't the social yakety-yaks around the campfire, that's for sure.
However, as our understanding of autism improved, the 240-page document would soon bring a wave of misinformation, one that still affects us to this day.
Vaccines cause autism?
Well, I have 1 million results that say they don't, and 1 result that says they do.
I knew it.
Just because I have it doesn't mean it's true!
In 1998, former Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a study involving 12 children falsely claiming that the MMR vaccine caused autism. This led to one of the most damaging myths about autism, a misconception that still persists to this day.
Not only did Wakefield's paper give birth to an anti-vaccine movement, it scared parents into skipping or delaying vaccines.
4 children died from measles. 3 died in Ireland, 1 died in England. Died from a disease that was perfectly and safely prevented by a vaccine, died because of that paper. That paper killed 4 children.
It took 12 years for the Lancet to take off Wakefield's study, but the damage was already done. Anti-vaccine groups used Wakefield's paper and the rising case of more children being diagnosed with autism, and also accommodating the fact that more people are vaccinating their children as proof that vaccines are unsafe and cause autism. However, the reason why autism is on the rise is because the way we diagnose it has improved tremendously. That is why autism seems on the rise. Currently, in the US, 1 out of 36 children have autism. So, with the rise of more people being diagnosed with autism, we need to improve on how we deal with neurodivergent people today. The main thing I want to focus on is education. Currently, our education system is flawed. Parents have been struggling to have schools meet their children's needs, and they can only hope that their teachers are following their child's IEP. An IEP is a legally binding document that outlines the special education services and accommodations a student needs to succeed academically. It is developed collaboratively by parents, teachers, and the student. However, some educators fail to follow the student's IEP, which is not only unfair, but also illegal. This is also a common issue for neurodivergent students, as some educators believe that the IEP accommodations are excessive, which may be true in certain cases. However, in many situations, the problem stems from a lack of understanding, especially when it comes to the conditions of being neurodivergent. I personally experienced some teachers who doubted my need for accommodation simply because it didn't fit their idea of what autism looks like. Unfortunately, this mindset is common for educators who've been teaching for a long time and believe they can structure their classrooms however they see fit, regardless how it affects students with disabilities. My grandmother, who holds multiple degrees in the education department, told me that in her experience, probably over 30% of teachers fail to follow accommodations for students with disabilities. But she also emphasized that when students receive the proper support, they thrive academically. Now that we have explored the history of autism and the current events that affect us today, This next section will focus on what you can do as a parent or an educator. Now, for educators, one of the key aspects of supporting autistic students is learning from the successful educational models around the world. For example, in the UK, the Kirklees Council opened a school specifically designed for autistic children. Their goal was to ensure that each student thrives by providing the necessary accommodations that they need. And another way that educators can help is by understanding what each student needs.
One thing that's going to help many, many students with autism is I do not remember long strings of verbal information. If somebody says, now this is how you do the chemistry experiment, yak, 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 and there might be 8 steps. I need to write them down. And I need to write them down in a pilot's checklist format. It's a very easy accommodation, and you can teach the student to make their own checklist.
Another thing that can help is when autistic students accommodate for their needs, or that they are involved in teacher training, which is what I did at my own school, Santa Fe Indian School, and I did for another school at the Mays Center for Learning. At both of those schools, I conducted teacher training, and I told of what autism is and what it's not, and I emphasized of how important it is for each teacher to understand their students' learning style, so they could add that to their curriculum and make sure that no one is left behind academically. Another thing that people need to get a better understanding of is special education.
Special education can be a very cookie cutter approach. So they want every kid in special ed still to use the same stuff and do the same thing and do this, but it's really hard to do because every kid with autism might be working on a certain skill, and then sometimes with education, so if a child is having a hard time communicating or conversating or even just labeling things in their environment so they can start talking one day, but we're focused on them learning the ABCs. What's more beneficial of us just spending our time teaching them to talk or teaching them the ABCs? Because when they're 6, 7 more years, if they still can't talk but they know the ABCs, what's the point, right? So I think sometimes in education it's really looking at what's meaningful and can really change their lives rather than just teaching to the test or teaching to the curriculum or teaching to whatever guidelines you have to teach to.
And another thing that needs to be assured is to make sure that we do not over-accommodate the student as well.
Well, that often happens. There's a tendency for a lot of parents to do everything for the kid. So a lot of kids are not learning things like bank account and basic skills like shopping. But the checklists are something that are really needed.
Yeah.
Some accommodations are really needed. And I basically need to have an external working memory. And that's a very easy accommodation. And it would help people in school. It would also help them on jobs. You go in, let's say you have a job at Walmart, and you got to run the cash register, and I got to log in the morning. Let me write down the steps of logging into the cash register. Let me write it down.
Okay.
Very, very simple thing.
In general, over-accommodating children with autism could cause more harm than good. But it's important for parents to understand their child's strengths and weaknesses academically and understand what is over-accommodation and what's the proper accommodations for their child. And for new parents who discover that their child has autism and they are still a young child, it is best that you find an ABA therapist, as early intervention is really important, especially for young children.
Early intervention is super important. I feel like we're all being molded and shaped at an early age, so early intervention is key. Just to services in general, but like I said, I'm a huge advocate for giving kids what they need and how much they need. Sometimes too much can be too much, and it's kind of like changing what had happened in the past. Some people have gotten bad services, too many hours, just strict intervention, which not everybody needs. So it's kind of just like changing the way people look at ABA and just how much people need it.
And there is strong evidence supporting the effectiveness of early intervention. A recent study conducted at the United Arab Emirates University followed 16 preschool-aged children undergoing early intervention therapy for 2 years. The results showed significant improvements in social skills and behavioral skills while also reducing stress for the families. Now, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. We still need to get people to understand what autism is and what it's not. Unfortunately, I can't do it alone. And for those who have autism, my recommendation is that you start helping out in teacher meetings. Help them understand what it is, how autism affects you, what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and get them to understand you on a deeper level and help them understand autism a bit better so they can become better teachers for it. This is Temujin Abeda, and I thank you for watching this film.